back to the G-Spot on TV6. You know, I say this program is to inform and educate, and I'm excited right now. You know why? I have with us a lovely guest. She's visiting. She's a professor from Brooklyn University. She's here to do some research on sex and maybe what we sing about in CAISO or literature, all these things. That is exciting stuff, you know, because when you go back to ancient teachings and whatnot about sex and sexuality and sexual behavior, it comes from literature, it comes from drawing, it comes from the words that were expressed in songs. So I'm all excited about that. I want to hear more. I want to know everything I can. And of course, I'm sure you want to know also. Welcome, Dr. King.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Welcome to the G-Spot. You're visiting Trinidad from Brooklyn College.
Yes,
when did you come?
I just came actually about 2 days ago.
2 days ago. So you never heard of the G-Spot before?
I had not heard of the G-Spot before, but I'm excited to be here, and I've seen a bit of it since I've come. And what I love is that you talk not just about sex in the bedroom, because what I deal with is sexuality and culture. And what you talk about also is that sex involves your brain and what you eat and who you're with and manners and all kinds of things beyond what happens.
That's right. So tell us a bit about your research before. But first of all, what do you teach?
I teach sexuality in relationship to literature and performance from the Caribbean and at Brooklyn College in Brooklyn, New York.
So it's sexuality through literature and performance.
Yes.
Just give us a bit about that.
Sure. Well, what's exciting again to me is sexuality kind of beyond the bedroom, including the bedroom, but also in relationship to culture. So for instance, a lot of people will learn about sex through what they hear from other people, through what they read in books before they actually engage in sex.
That's right.
And so I'm interested.
Observation also, especially in Trinidad.
And observation, definitely. And we also sometimes have different reactions to sexuality in different places. So we might react to expressions of sexuality differently when we see it in Carnival than when we see people perhaps performing a sex act in the open, right?
Yes.
We're going to react to different types of sexuality in different places, locations differently. So I'm looking at sexuality and culture.
And you said the Caribbean and Africa.
Yes.
Is there a similarity between the Caribbean and Africa in terms of culture, sexual behavior? Have you discovered that?
Yes, there are a number of similarities, in part because of the history of colonialism.
Yes.
So we've had, the Europeans who came in and imposed really these Victorian sensibilities, which in some ways we've retained.
Yes,
over time.
a lot of it we've retained.
A lot of it we've retained, and this preoccupation with respectability. But at the same time, we have these, again, like Carnival and Calypso and all of these other cultural forms in which we slip sexuality in either overt or covert ways. So that kind of duality, I would say, exists not in exactly the same ways, but in similar ways between Africa and the Caribbean.
So if in Calypso, you have this underlying sexual edge that transcends everything. Yes, you have that. You also have that in Chutney, have you?
Absolutely. In fact, I write about Duality in my book, which is called Island Bodies, Transgressive Sexualities in the Caribbean Imagination. And
Excellent.
I have a chapter in which I look at Duality and Alison Hines and even Rihanna, and how Caribbean women have explored women's sexual agency through music.
So your research that has brought you to Trinidad, what is it about?
I'm very excited to be here in TNT at the University of the West Indies. The IGDS, the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, is working with me and the Caribbean International Resource Network, a lot of words, but we're working together to present a course on sexuality studies that is open primarily to graduate students, but anyone who wants to can actually attend.
I'm glad to hear that, because there's so many persons who ask me, how do you become a sexologist? What do you need to do? Where do you go to study? I had to beat around, I had to write universities and ask them to change certain things just to get my PhD. Absolutely. And I had to go through the route of health to do it. Not directly with sex, but of course, studying sex is a practical thing also.
Yes.
And I tell people that it's not just book work, it's practical. You've got to be practical about studying sex. And if you're not practical about it, and if you don't understand concepts and behavior and I like to use this terminology. We are social anthropologists, sexologists. We look at society, we look at changes that take place in society, the words that comes out of our repertoire, the things that we do to develop our brain. So let's expand more about what's happening with that.
Absolutely.
Music, especially with music. I love that kind of story.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about the course and then some other things that relate directly to music. The course, actually, we have people from the medical part of the college, as well as the humanities and the social sciences. So everyone who's interested in sex, we have someone who's working as a rape crisis counselor. We have someone who's working with youth. So there's a lot of different possibilities there. That course starts on the 8th of July, on Monday, but there are still a few slots open. If people are interested, they can contact me.
Can I come in?
Absolutely. You can come in probably more as an observer than a student, I think, at this point.
Why not?
With your
I'm always a
expertise.
student.
But we're going to cover everything from the basic concepts to how to do research in
So this is
sexuality.
from the 8th of July
Till the 1st of August.
Okay.
Yes.
Every day?
Monday to Friday, 4 to 8 p.m., so 4 days a week. It's an intensive course because we're trying to get across really a bulk of information in a relatively short period of time.
Yes,
And then
limited.
is going to expand on that and take some of these materials and continue to teach them over the next
Well, I'm
few
glad to hear
years.
that because if UE does that, at least some of the students who have written to me ask me what
Absolutely.
to do. I can direct them in that
Uni has
direction.
told me the same thing. That's why I'm here. They came to me and said, we have all of these students who are interested in sexuality studies and we need more resources, more materials. So the materials that we're teaching in the course, we're actually going to be putting them free on the internet so that both people at UE, but also anyone, anywhere who has access to the internet can learn more about Caribbean sexualities in particular.
What have you found with our music and sex? What's the relationship?
The relationship is really a lot of this notion of the double entendre, right? So to be able to address it, but not directly, right? And on Friday, July 12th, we have, both Friday and Saturday of next weekend, we have these events called Sexualities in the Tent. And obviously that's a reference to the Calypso tent,
yes.
right? And in particular, Friday night from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the old fire station downtown in Port of Spain. We're going to be having an event. We're going to have people, we're going to be playing Calypsos and discussing them. The event is actually called Patricia Gone with Millicent meets Naipaul. And Patricia Gone with Millicent, do you know that Calypso?
Yes.
All right.
Meets Naipaul, the
right.
writer, the author.
Yes, so we're taking some of these Calypsos that really are addressing sexuality and having an opportunity to deconstruct them in a very kind of lively atmosphere. And it will be interactive. So there'll be people who have PhDs like me who will be on stage, but we're also going to be having conversations with the audience because Trinidad is a place where people are very conversant with our culture.
Yes.
So if I tell you the name of a Calypso, you know it. People in the audience will know it. If I say, do you remember this song by Drupati, Hotter Than a Chula? What is she talking about? Is she just talking about food? She's talking about more than food,
More
right?
than food.
Absolutely.
A sexual response.
Absolutely.
Responsiveness.
Absolutely.
Literature. You did mention Naipaul.
Yes.
How does that tie in with things that are sexual? Not that necessarily Naipaul. Literature in Trinidad and Tobago.
Absolutely. Well, again, you have a lot of interesting things that are happening in the literature over time. So I would say in the 1920s to the 1940s, you have not a whole lot of talking about sexuality, right? Naipaul begins coming out a little bit later than that, and he has some very interesting things to say about interracial sexuality. In The Mimic Men, he has a man who goes to England and doesn't want to have any relations with women from where he's from.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
because it represents, to him, kind of staying behind.
Yes.
And he wants to move forward. He wants to be a part of the metropole in Europe. And so sexuality for that character becomes part of how he expresses himself as an immigrant. Right? You have Shani Mutu, who's someone who's publishing more recently, who's based in Canada. And she wrote a book called Out on Main Street. And in one of her short stories, which is actually hilarious, she tells a story about two women who are girlfriends who go into a store and are told, on the one hand, they're not real Indians because they're from Trinidad, right? And then later on, they're told kind of that they're not real women because they're with each other. But it's done in a very playful way, and it's using the Trinidad dialect. So there's a real range of sexuality that's represented in our literature.
So you're going to continue with your research while you're in Trinidad?
Absolutely, always. In fact, I'm actually very interested in 19th century carnival and some of the masquerades that were happening then. And, you know, over time, again, what is considered sexy and what is considered scandalous is very different. So at that time, there was a group of women who were playing masks, wearing shorts.
Scandalous. You're not supposed to show the knees.
Exactly.
Imagine that. Some time ago, you couldn't show the knees.
They would be appalled if you
Now you can at least show the pegs of the rear.
Absolutely.
So you have seen a transition with Trinidad culture just through the studies that you're doing. If someone wants to further their studies in human sexuality and whatnot, they can do it through Brooklyn College? Or what do they exactly?
They can do it through Brooklyn College, but if they're located in Trinidad, or I know you have yours in Grenada as well, I would tell them look first to the University of the West Indies. Each campus of the University of the West Indies has an Institute for Gender and Development Studies, and increasingly they're looking at sexuality in addition to gender. If they're in town, they can also come to these events we're having next week. Again, Friday, 5 to 8 p.m. Saturday, I believe it's 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And
that's the same
in the same place at the old fire station, we're having a workshop on Saturday as well, and that can kind of give them an introduction to sexuality studies to find out whether this is something they just want to pursue as a hobby or whether they're actually interested in studying it a little bit more seriously.
I just found out that we have so many activities taking place this Saturday, but I'm sure all the young students, all the persons who are interested in sexology, study of sex from all different angles, and again, don't study sex from the physical act of intercourse. You need to understand people's behavior, what causes them to react or act in a particular way. You know, we talk about when it's carnival, we free up. You go to a chutney show and you see people gyrating in the worst possible way. Next day you see that girl walking on the street and she don't even want to say hello to you. These things happen in our society, so we got to understand why these things happen. It's to make us a better person, to make us a better society. So let's continue with what you're doing, the university, your studies. You know, sometimes you start off with a theory. Is there any theory you have about Trinidad and Trinidadian sexual belief and behavior?
I'll get in trouble if I talk specifically about Trinidad, I think.
Well, generally, Caribbean.
I'll talk more about the Caribbean.
Let's do the Caribbean. Okay.
Yeah, and actually I do think that there's enough that's in common, even across languages and so on, that we can talk about the Caribbean generally. I think that the legacy of slavery and of indentureship, combined with the kind of post-colonial, neo-colonial situation that we have today, has resulted in this duality of sexuality. That on the one hand, we're in some ways comfortable expressing our sexuality in particular contexts. And on the other hand, we have this preoccupation with respectability and wanting to distance ourselves from sexuality. And that relates to race as well as religion and class in a lot of ways. So that's what I would say, is that there's kind of this duality that we've talked about in the Calypso,
yes.
But I think it persists throughout the culture as a whole. As you say, there might be a woman who wears a business suit to work and is very respectable, but then she wants to free up in Carnival. And she doesn't want that activity to reflect upon her. And in most times it won't.
Rightly so, because it depends on where you're working, because although we like Carnival, we like whining, we like everything that goes with it, we like to see a nice woman. If she steps out of line, let's say for example, you see her in a party and she whining down the place, the next day you lose respect for her at work. Simply because she's expressing herself and her sexuality or her behavior in a particular way, you think that she should not hold the same respect. And our society has this double standard, Absolutely. A lot of double standards. Absolutely. The guys who enjoy a strip show are the same one who's going to sit down and say, let's not have striptease in Trinidad. But for them, they sit on a plane, you hear them planning. As soon as we land here, we're going to this club, we're going to that club. You hear them, but they are the same ones who will say, no, we don't want that. We don't want a strip joint in Trinidad. We don't want that people to express themselves in that way. It's bad behavior. But when they step out, they're behaving differently.
What happens in private versus what happens in public. What happens, say, Saturday night versus what happens on Sunday morning. Right? And that's one of the things that some researchers, and there's a number of researchers besides me as well who are involved, including John Campbell, who teaches at UWI, and Alison Donnell coming from the UK, Colin Robinson, who we've had as a guest, is going to be teaching. But one of the things that people have found, for instance, in relation to same-sex desire in the Caribbean, is that it's not necessarily the sex that people have as much problem with. It's how you present yourself as a man or a woman. So if you're doing what you're doing behind closed doors, and people cannot tell from looking at you, they don't have as much problem with you as if they can see what you're doing, or they say that you're not acting masculine enough or feminine enough.
That's one of the things that I spoke to with Mr. Robinson yesterday. I was saying that some people have a problem with you presenting yourself. You're pushing it on. That's what they see to you. You're pushing your sexuality on me. I don't want that.
They perceive it as being visible.
Yes.
And that is considered the problem. And so that's again something of that duality, right? As long as I don't see it, it's not a problem. But if I can see it, then it becomes a problem. And this is related to sexual abuse as well. We all know that sexual abuse happens.
Yes.
Right? But unfortunately, we don't deal with it until it becomes
it's a cultural thing also. You know?
Absolutely.
Sometimes you hear it being sung about. When we get back after the break, I want to discuss that. Some of the Calypsonians, some of the Calypso, some of the things that are being said, I want to discuss that. I want us to go into that because it's very important for us to understand the way we portray ourselves to the world, what is happening in music, the meaning within the music, the lyrics, and how people interpret it. So that is something we need to discuss when we get back on to Jesus. love research. I remember when I was in university, in my first degree, I did a wonderful piece of research on the mighty sparrow. I wrote a paper on the mighty sparrow and I presented it, and I was like a sparrow on top of a fence, I had my chest out, and I was talking about this guy called the mighty sparrow. And I overheard two ladies in the corridor, not too long afterwards, talking about they have to go and see this man, and they were talking in excitement. They weren't in my class, they were in another class. So I heard the excitement in them, and one of them happened to say, Slinger Francisco. And I turned to the lady and I said, did you just say the mighty sparrow? She said, do you know him? I said, of course, he's from my country, and I was excited. She said, he's in a concert this weekend. I went to that concert, and there was the mighty sparrow on stage. This is in North America. So there weren't many West Indians in Florida at that time. This is 1979, 1980, I'm telling you about. And these women were going in a frenzy for the mighty sparrow. I actually saw a woman take off her underwear and belt it on stage. That's when I knew Sparrow Ridge. That's when I understood why he sang some of his Calypso. But I understood what research was all about, because in our society, to be an educator, you have to have research. You must understand what is happening from the ground up. You must understand the behavior of individuals. And I'll tell you this, Calypso is one of my favorite forms of music. And I can tell you, I could call scores of Calypso, but I always like to focus on Sparrow because I think he's the king of it all. Saltfish. Now this week is the vagina. I didn't want to put the professor in any kind of confusion here. I just want to ask her, what is the correlation between literature, Calypso, soca, and the saltfish for the vagina? Have you found a relationship here?
Well, certainly there's a lot of addressing of woman's sexuality.
Behavior.
Yes.
Expression.
Behavior, expression, and how men respond to women's sexuality and how women perceive of their own sexuality is going to be different.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, my understanding of that very same Calypso, saltfish, will be different from your understanding of it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You also have all of the references in Calypso to cats, right?
Yes.
And
Pussycat.
yes, and mostly it's men singing about women, right? Afraid, 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 pussy bite me, right?
I'm afraid of that too.
This is the kind of thing, and so again, it's fascinating because this is how we learn about cultural norms, is through hearing and singing these songs. It's not necessarily in the classroom because we don't have that much sexual education in the classroom.
That's right. We don't have enough sexual education in the classroom from a young age, so we hear it in songs. And people complain about sometimes this programming. They say that, why are you teaching people about sex? It's supposed to be taught hidden in a box. Don't bring it out in the open. But that same child is listening to some reggae artist or Calypsonian or even some rap artists now. They're very blunt about it. And it's happening. It's taking place in our society.
Absolutely. And as Calypso has evolved, the range, actually Calypso has always been very diverse. So you're talking about Sparrow. As you know, every single song almost that Sparrow has sung has, but in different ways, right? So the classic Gina Dinah is about prostitution and politics, right? Congo Man is about interracial sexuality, right? So there's, I know some people call some of the Calypsos smutty Calypsos and so on.
Well, that was the terminology that was used to ban Calypsos from the airwaves. It's smut. Yes. So as long as it's smutty, we don't want it on the airwaves. But I'll tell you, the king of that is not Sparrow.
No, absolutely no.
It's crazy. Crazy. He does take anything, any word, and change it up to a sexual meaning.
And as we have kind of the pussy and the pussycat songs, we also have the Nani songs, right? Coming from Chutney.
Yes,
so yes, they're very kind of similar.
But I think the Nani songs are degrading because I cherish my Nani, and my Nani is my grandmother.
Yes.
And that's what it means. To me, I don't like songs like that because I put her up on a pedestal. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think when you do that, it's degrading, but I understand why people like it. I'm not against those who like it, but I myself wouldn't sing something like that. I remember, Crazy took this thing called a fax machine and made it into a sex song. A fax machine. Crazy is great at that. And not only Crazy, but others. But it's reflection of us as a people. The East Indian culture also have the very same thing because there's something called the hardi when you're getting married. And when you go to that, guys are not allowed to go to that. Every sexual act they sang about, they take a bygone and make it into a phallic object, the penis,
Yes.
and they pretend they do certain things, and it's all part of the culture.
Yes, and the women have something similar as well, right? That the women have and the men cannot come to.
Yeah.
And the woman who might be the most esteemed woman in the community, but in that space, they're permitted to be
themselves, be a
and
woman.
a little bit more explicit about their own sexuality, and probably making some fun of men as well.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do, because it's all part of what's supposed to happen. But it's also, they glorify the male phallic object. It's a glorification of it.
Yes.
The same
Again,
way,
that double way. So in one way, it's a way for women to express their sexual agency, but in some ways, it's reinforcing the power of men because they're glorifying the
yes,
phallic object.
they're glorifying it in that way. And it's all healthy, because it's us being ourselves, it's us being able to express ourselves, and in song, music, literature. Again, I am fascinated about the literature part of it, because I have not found much reference things that are sexual about the Caribbean, except short stories that are written, some articles that are written on the newspaper, which is they're wonderful articles that really expresses the way women think, the way men think, the coming together of both of them. There's always a condemnation about sexual acts during Carnival. Have you found that in your research, that there's a high level of sexuality?
In literature?
Literature, behavior.
So I would say that...
Forget the music, we already deal with
Yes,
the music.
we talked about the
we know
music.
it's there.
Although I
It's
should
fact.
say that the events we're having next weekend, the Sexualities and the tent event, they wouldn't be Trinidadian if there wasn't a lime. So there is a lime on Saturday night from 4 to 8 p.m. and it's at Bohemia. So people
Bohemia is where?
Bohemia is in Woodbrook, and so people have the opportunity. If you look up Sexualities in the tent on Facebook, you'll get all the information. And it's an opportunity for people to hang out informally, but also there'll be a lot of creative artists there as well. So it's
I know we love
very
a lime.
Trinidadian.
We
Very
love a lime.
Trinidadian, yes.
A lime is an expression also. Because a lime is where you go to gape, a lime is where you go to be the peacock,
Yes.
or there you flaunt yourself, and a lime is also to observe. And the ladies are there for the very same reason, just that they don't come out as openly as men to express themselves.
Yes, yes. In terms of the literature, this is where you see some differences amongst different parts of the Caribbean region. So you'll find that the Francophone literature, the literature in French,
Yes.
is sometimes much more explicit.
French literature is always more explicit.
Yes.
They describe things down to the nitty-gritty.
Oh, absolutely. So Daniel Leferrière, who's from Montreal, from Haiti, lives in Montreal now. Maurice Condé, who's from Guadeloupe. They're very explicit in their literature, which not always, even in their own countries, people liked. Maurice Condé wrote very explicitly about a young woman who was having sex with 3 different men.
Mm-hmm.
And she wasn't having sex with them at the same time. So 3 different boyfriends over the course of 10 years. But people in Guadeloupe were extremely upset that she was saying women were promiscuous and all of this. But she said this is how young women live. And so she was trying to portray the reality. Junot Diaz, who's now very popular in the United States, originally from the Dominican Republic, is writing from the men's perspective. And again, there are some people from the Caribbean who are saying, oh, he's reinforcing stereotypes because his character has a lot of sex with a lot of women. But there's an element of truth in stereotypes as well.
That's our problem. You write or you speak about the truth in society, the single moms. How do single moms come about? How these young 14-year-old girls are walking the street and they're pregnant? Somebody must have had sex with them. But when you talk about it, it's like, oh, you're reinforcing the stereotype. That's not supposed to be spoken about. But nobody dealing with the issue. They're not dealing with the issue because that may be a form of abuse. Because the underlying cause of that, if you're having sex with a 14-year-old, it's abuse, it's sexual abuse in some form or the other. And we as researchers, we as educators, we have to bring it up. However you want to accept it, the population want to accept it, that's their way of doing things. That I'm not forcing anything on you, but I want you to understand that. The literature does that. And literature, it's only the narrow-minded, myopic individual who wants to ban literature. You're right. If you don't like what I'm writing, don't read it.
Exactly.
It's the same way you open the newspaper, there's someone that you don't like, you don't read his or her article, that's fine, that's your choice. But literature is there to express. And there is always a level of truth in whatever is being written, because somebody's writing that.
Absolutely. And someone's resonating with it as they read it.
That's right.
Yes.
So you feel what is in the book, you feel what is in the language of the individual, the expression of the person, because you actually get into that. Same thing with music. You listen to certain calypso and you want to get up. They're just saying, no matter who you are, you hear Tassa drumming, your feet go like this. You start to tap your feet. Because it does that to you. It's part of It's part of your DNA. It's part of being a Caribbean man or a Caribbean woman or someone from Africa or someone from India. That was all part of us in the past. We come here now, we are melting pot, we are people who are expressive. Let us express ourselves.
In every way.
That's
yes.
right.
And I'm hoping that more people will come to the literature, because just like people want to go and read 50 Shades of Grey, we have these kinds of texts in the Caribbean.
I don't know why people think that's the best book written on sex.
I don't think it is at all. But I
No,
think
it isn't.
But we have a number of texts that, not in that way, but in different ways, are addressing Caribbean sexuality and are relevant to our context in the same way that our music is. So I want people to go out and support all of these events where they can hear a
Let's
lot
hear
of
about the
pretty
events
writing.
again very shortly.
So the events are happening on Friday, July 12th. And that's
July 12th, that's next week Friday.
Next week Friday at the Old Fire Station, 5 to 8 p.m.
5 to 8.
Open to the public. We'll be playing Calypso. We'll be reading from Trinidadian literature about sex, so that'll be great. Saturday, July 13th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. also at the Old Fire Station. And then the line is 4 to 8 p.m. at the Humanities in Woodbrook.
In Woodbrook.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being on this
Thank you
program.
for having me.
Lovely chatting with you. I like all the information, excited about it. I hope you got as much information as possible from this segment. It's all about you, it's all about education. Again, if you want to go and study a bit about sex and literature and how it pertains to Trinidad and Tobago culture, you can do that at UE. There's events next weekend, Friday and Saturday. Get involved. Don't just sit down and condemn. Don't just sit down and say, well, I learned through the television. Make an effort for you to step out there, be educated, find out from the professors, people who have done research. We have done research. Why? Because we want to pass that on. We don't take the knowledge and keep it in us, like Dr. King. I'm sure she wants to spread her information throughout the population, throughout the world. That's what we do. So remember that, folks. We want to share. Please share with us. We'll be right back on the